Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for being early. We still have just 3 minutes until we get started. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for that reminder, Teresa. I will make another announcement as soon as we get started, but if you do want to listen to the town hall in Spanish and you're on the Zoom, there's the option to join by clicking on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. But I'll remind everyone as we move along too.
Pica. Forget. I just want this.
Who I was.
Okay, it is 8 o'clock, and for those who are just joining, friendly reminder to please mute yourself if you are not speaking. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you for joining the town hall. We are thrilled to see this interest and support for early childhood education and care. My name is Lillian Matsuda, and I am from Illinois Action for Children, which is just one of the 100+ organizations that make up the Early Childhood Funding Coalition. We are honored to be here in partnership with the Funding Commission for tonight's event. Before I hand the mic over to Commission co-chairs Senator Menard and George Davis, I will first review our agenda and a few logistics for tonight. If you haven't done so already, please take a moment to click on the participant list and change your name so your fellow attendees can get a better sense of who their neighbors are this evening. So all you have to do is just find your name, click on it, and of course, write your name, your role, and what city you're coming from. So for example, you could write Jane, parent, coming from Rockford. We're happy to offer live Spanish translation for this town hall, and you should see the option to join what we're referring to as our Spanish speaking room by clicking on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Big thanks to Steffi Hernandez, who is providing live translation tonight. Of course, another friendly reminder to please mute yourself if you aren't speaking. Thank you so much. This is also where I remind both the other speakers and myself to please be mindful of our live translation with the speaking pace that you keep. Really got to remind myself to do that. This is our agenda for tonight. After I review a few more things, I will pass it over to our commissioners. We'll begin our Q&A at 8:25. And finally, we will conclude the evening with public comment and share just a couple opportunities of how to stay involved with some of the topics you hear about tonight. Because we like to get a better picture of who has joined this town hall, we have one question for everyone before we move ahead. So I'm going to pull up our poll. we go. Please click on the option that best describes yourself. So I'll give people about 15 or 20 seconds or so to select the best answer. It's really interesting to see all of these come in real time. Looks like we have a good representation for directors, owners, and administrators. Got some good commission and government agency representation tonight, as well as home child care providers and parents. I'll leave the poll open just for a few more seconds. I know that some more people are joining us. Okay. Well, this was really helpful. Thank you so much. And again, welcome to everyone. Close this out here. All right, participation. There are two ways to participate during the Q&A. You may raise your hand by clicking on your name and then clicking the raised hand icon. And a coalition member, Jessica Ramos, will identify you and unmute you so you can ask your question to the commissioners directly. Or you may type your question into the chat box. Members of the coalition will be monitoring the chat box as the questions come in. We will do our absolute best to get to every question, but it is likely we will not be able to. So please know that the chat box will be saved and all questions will be routed to the commissioners and any other appropriate party after the town hall. Just another reminder to please mute yourself if you are not speaking. Thank you. If you would like to sign up for public comment, please let us know by typing, "I would like to sign up for public comment" directly into the chat box, and Bethany will record your name. And of course, if you're somebody who likes to use social media, feel free to live tweet or post on Facebook along with us tonight using our hashtag #AllInForEarlyEd. And finally, thank you to our coalition partner, Advance Illinois, for providing our live stream tonight. Finally, these are our community agreements for this evening. Please respect the opinion of others, even if you do not agree. Speak as openly as you feel comfortable. Everyone is encouraged to participate. Listening is as important as speaking, and common courtesy is always exhibited. And with that, I will pass over to Zoom mic. George Davis and Senator Menard, you can rely on me to keep an eye on the clock. So my apologies in advance if I interject momentarily just to remind us of our schedule tonight as we near the Q&A time. But for now, over to you.
Well, thank you, Lillian, and Action for Children for helping to bring about this space tonight, as well as Bethany Patton from the Governor's Office of Early Childhood, and the many others that made it possible for us to have this gathering. This is the first of a series of 4 town hall meetings that are hosted by the Commission on Equitable Early Childhood Education and Care Funding and supported by the Early Childhood Funding Coalition. My name is George Davis, and I am one of the 4 co-chairs of the commission. Tonight, joining me, one of the other co-chairs of the commission is Senator Andy Menard. And the two of us will be introducing this topic and going over a brief overview of the work of the commission, and then asking for the input of the rest of you tonight. There's several other commissioners also joining us tonight on this town hall. And I'd like to take a pause now to ask if those of you who are on the call who are serving as commissioners would introduce yourselves.
Hi, this is Ray Gonzalez, President and CEO of Alvalor. Hi, this is Christina Hachikian. I'm a professor of strategy at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business.
My name is Rochelle Galladay, and I am the Executive Director of Cuddle Care Incorporated.
Good evening, this is Grace Ho, and I'm the Secretary of the Illinois Department of Human Services.
Good evening, everyone. This is State Representative Will Davis of the 30th District in the South Suburbs. I put in the chat that I'm using the laptop of my District Director, Tawny Smith, so that's why you see her name there and not mine, but glad to be here this evening with you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pat Chamberlain. I'm retired Director of Elgin U46 Early Childhood.
Good evening. I'm Shauna Edjay. I am the Senior Vice President for Programs at Illinois Action for Children.
Hi, I'm Nadia Burgo. I'm an early childhood education teacher in Highland Park.
Thank you. And are there any other commissioners that have not introduced themselves? Okay, hearing none, we will proceed. So first of all, there are three parts to our meeting tonight. The first would be to really share information about the work of the commission over the past year. The second, myself and Commissioner and Co-Chair Senator Menard will take questions about the work and have a conversation with you about the commission's recommendations. We may also call upon other commissioners to assist in responding to questions that you might raise tonight. And third, we'll hold some time for any comments from folks who would like to share any public comments before the night is over, even though we will not likely be able to hear from everyone depending on how many want to comment, but we will explain later how that will work. So on the slide that you should be seeing now, you should see the commission's charge. And I think I'm just going to simply read this. The commission shall study and make recommendations to establish funding goals and funding mechanisms to provide equitable access to high quality early childhood education and care services for all children birth to age 5, and advise the governor in planning and implementing these recommendations. So you can see in a bit more detail on the next slide what this charge entails. So the commission's focus, of course, is on early care and education centers, as well as homes, child care subsidies, home visiting, preschool, early intervention, early childhood special education, family friend and neighbor care, and daycare licensing. These are all of the components of our early childhood system, and none of them are being left out as we consider what changes might help to improve the effectiveness and access and impact of these services. So as far as funding goes, one of the questions that the commission has taken up is how much of an investment will it take to get to adequate funding for early childhood education and care, on the understanding that currently we are not really serving all the children in the state who can and need to be served, especially at a high level of quality. Secondly, we need to look, and the second question we took up was really how we should be funding and delivering the services to better support children and families and providers who serve them. And then third, in the planning and implementation of the recommendations that come out of the commission, how should the state implement a new system of funding? So these were the three questions that have driven the work of the commission to date. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about why the commission was created. Illinois has a history of innovation in early childhood. We're considered one of the national leaders in home visiting. We are one of the states that have made a robust investment in childcare for quite some time, although we've had ups and downs in the funding of our childcare system. And we're one of the earliest states to fund preschool as a program, really, and actually cross-system support, including really a commitment to serve children, both 3 and 4-year-olds, in the preschool environment. But it's time to reflect on how we're serving the children and families. The inadequate and uneven access to high quality education and care is one of our biggest challenges, in spite of the innovations and in spite of the strengths of our system. And also the very low wages of early childhood professionals continues to be a challenge with finding and retaining the highest quality professionals in the field. And then really, we still continue to see low kindergarten readiness rates, much lower than we need to see and that we want to see. And in order for this to be corrected, as much as we may have accomplished up until now, there's still a lot more to do. So it's time to envision an early childhood system that really provides equitable access to high quality services for all children. We also know that children who come from certain parts of our state, certain communities in our state, certain demographics in our state, both Black and brown children, as well as rural counties and children who are among the poorest of the poor, really oftentimes have both the least access and the poorest outcomes. So, and I add that as just another reality that the commission really. So it's not just about improving access by just having more, it's also considering who's being served and how. So if we look at the next slide, the commission was created as an opportunity to re-engage the early childhood system in a way that is better supports children, families, educators, providers, and communities. Because really these stakeholders are really all inseparable. We can't imagine improving the outcomes for all of our children without engaging all of these stakeholders. They're interconnected, and we have to treat a system that provides improvements as if these interconnections are real, and we have to take into account the role that each plays and what supports are needed in each arena. So we want to achieve high quality, equity. We want to make bold change. We want to build on past successes and strengths. We want to honor parent and family choice. And we also want stability and sustainability in the system, as well as accountability. And we also want to face the realities of what the implementation of a new system really entails, which is part of why you have all been invited to this town hall meeting. The reality testing has a lot to do with how this will translate once the recommendations that you'll be hearing about sort of hit the bricks, so to speak, and start to be rolled out. I do want to say in this respect that one of the things that's very likely to come up and has to be on all of our minds is the environment that we're in right now. We know that the state has been impacted like the rest of the nation by COVID-19 and the pandemic. We know that this has had a devastating effect on lots of systems of care, not just early childhood, but we also know that the effects of this has had a major impact on many of the children and families that we serve, especially the most vulnerable. And we know that providers have been faced with really difficult decisions and choices, and have really struggled to really acquire, maintain the support that they need to be able to serve the children and families. At the same time, there's been a tremendous amount of creativity and resilience shown by providers and families in the effort to address the situation that we're all facing. So we go into this conversation tonight not ignoring that reality. We can't. But at the same time, this is the time to be thinking boldly about how we make broad and deep systemic change, knowing that the crisis that we're in will eventually be behind us in some form or another, and that we will have to build on what we've learned and also look at the difficulties that we've gone through during this time. Tonight, we will not be so much really though addressing those immediate crises and effects of the pandemic, though we know that that is a backdrop. You may have questions and challenges, and probably do, related to that. And we certainly can take questions that hopefully might be answered at another point by those who are involved with the state agencies who are helping to guide the current system and take into account those current realities. But I just wanted to just remind us that that will not be the main focus of tonight's conversation. So in going ahead and looking at our next slide, we want to just briefly touch on the commission's guiding principles. Let's see.
And we need to go back a couple of slides. I think we
Yeah.
captured those back a couple slides.
Yes.
Right there.
Yes, right. So so having looked at these already briefly, we can move forward. Yes, go ahead. My apology. So what we want to do now is to really start to look at the actual recommendations that have come forward through the commission up until this point. So at this point, the commission's final report is still in a draft stage, and there is still room to make changes or improvements in response to questions or concerns that have maybe not been addressed or not been addressed as thoroughly as there need be, which is why we felt that this series of town hall meetings would still be important. Also keep in mind that the timing of this is a little bit in our favor in that the commission's work has been extended through March. And so we will have time for some additional meetings of the commission and its various working groups to consider or reconsider some of the components of the recommendations as need be. So with that in mind, we really are seeking the feedback of stakeholders throughout the state, even though we have been doing that throughout the year. But these town halls really provide us with, I think, one more opportunity to get broader input. So the commission really has three major draft recommendations, and each is focused on a different part of the commission's charge. There is a recommendation focused on funding adequacy, a recommendation focused on the mechanisms for distributing funding, and recommendation focused on how the system should be governed. So basically, the major recommendations are in those three areas. The commission has also started to discuss next steps in the work beyond submitting the report, since there are still many unanswered questions that need to be vetted and answered moving forward, recognizing that the implementation phase of the commission's work begins immediately after the recommendations are turned over to the governor and when the governor moves his decision toward adopting those recommendations. And so we want to be ready for that implementation phase as best as possible. So at this time, we're going to turn over this discussion of the specific recommendations and guiding us through that to our co-chair, Senator Andy Menard.
Thank you so much, George. I appreciate your leadership and the leadership of the other co-chairs and all of the commissioners that have put so much into the work of the commission, going back just about a week shy of a year. The Governor Pritzker pulled us together about a year ago and gave us this charge, and I'm proud to be part of being able to show each of you on this call during our first town hall what our recommendations thus far look like, so that we can get your feedback, which is absolutely crucial in order for us to achieve the change that we are seeking to make us the best in the nation. So I appreciate this opportunity and look forward to your questions. I have a few minutes to get through these recommendations, which will tee us up for the discussion. So first, let's talk about the funding adequacy recommendation. Slide 7 shows what the commission believes would account for a high quality, equitable experience for children, and what that looks like, and also what it costs. The commission worked to create and construct a model of what it would cost to provide equitable access to high quality early childhood education and care funding for all children ages birth to 5 in all of the state. The model included things like you see here on this slide, with the goal of creating a high quality, equitable experience through the eyes of families and children that are served through our system. The model does not include, though, what it would take to get to this ideal state. The commission believes that is an important next step in the work. So this slide is, I think, the most crucial because from my perspective as one member of the state Senate that has worked alongside my colleague in the House, Representative Will Davis, who is with us tonight, we have to set a framework and set goals, and we have to set a path for where we need to go. And that's what the commission's work has embodied thus far. The commission's first recommendation on slide 8 is that early childhood education and care needs billions more in funding over time. We know that, right? We all know that because of the work that we do. We believe it would take an investment of over 6 times our current annual investment to provide all of the things shown on the previous slide. This is funding that should come from federal, state, and local levels, as well as support from philanthropic organizations across the state. Of course, this is a huge number. It's a very large investment that the state will need to build up over time, relying on support from federal partners. However, the commission still believed it was important to set a funding adequacy goal because a goal can, as I said earlier, help us figure out where we need to be and help guide policy decisions in state government. The commission recommends that the cost model is upgraded regularly so that we aren't in a perpetual state of no change, so that we are constantly looking how to do things better, and that an advisory body guide that process. There's also more work that needs to be done to hone in the adequacy goal, including further study in the cost of early intervention, early childhood special education, and family, friend, and neighbor care. That's ongoing work of the commission still today. Recommendation number 1. Number 2, on slide 9, is to centralize funding delivery from the state to providers to be more stable and equitable. I hear this from providers in my Senate district literally every day. Currently, early childhood funding is distributed through a mix of contracts and certificates. This process is uncoordinated, and it can disadvantage providers that don't have the resources to go through the application process for a contract such as in preschool for all. For these reasons, the Commission is recommending that funding be centralized at the state level and that the state use a more targeted grant-making process to distribute funds. These funds could be for services such as education and care or home visiting, or they could be for support such as professional development or community systems. The Commission recommends that the state provide support to providers in this process so that funds can be more equitably distributed. Separately from this, the Commission believes that more study is needed on the ways that early intervention and early childhood special education funding is distributed. These funds are more complex, relying on Medicaid funds and local funds alike. The Commission believes that more providers need to be part of this process of improving how these funds are distributed. And as I mentioned, this is still ongoing work of the Commission. It's important to note that this recommendation would be implemented over several years with providers closely involved in the process. This is not a change that can be made overnight for all providers. Slide 10 shows the benefits that Commission members believe could come from a system that relies more heavily on grants and contracts. Ultimately, this system has the potential for less bureaucracy and more stability than we see in our current system. The Commission's third recommendation on slide 11 is to centralize early childhood services into one agency. This would include all of the services seen on this slide. However, the Commission believes that further study is needed here as well for early childhood special education, which is part of the state's evidence-based funding formula for K through 12. The Commission believes that centralizing these services in one state agency would help create a more unified system with the capacities you see on the bottom of the slide, which are very important. I want to call out especially that the Commission believes that centralized services at the state level must come with unified regional and local community systems of support. These community systems can help providers to build capacity and help connect families to service that they need. These community systems will be critical to ensuring equitable access to services in our state's most underserved communities. Slide 12 shows the benefits that commissioners believe would come from centralizing early childhood services into one agency compared to spreading them across different agencies as they currently are today. There is tremendous potential here to simplify the way providers interact with the state, create more transparency, make it easier to get information, and ultimately serve children and families more equitably. On slide 13, you can see that this work will not end when the Commission ends. For recommendations as big as these that we have come up with, the devil is certainly in the details. There are many more questions that need to be answered in order to implement these recommendations, and this process should be thoughtful and should involve as many members of the early childhood system as possible across the state. This includes not just our first town hall tonight that we are engaged in, but we're looking forward to both answering your questions and also hearing your thoughts on these proposals as we bring them to you for the first time tonight. But also remind everyone that the Commission's website is incredibly detailed with all of the materials that commissioners have used, the record of all of our meetings over the past year. We plowed through COVID and we were determined to make sure that we were on schedule for this December so that we could have town hall meetings just like this. So thank you for listening during this overview that George and I gave you of the Commission's work thus far. I'd like to invite any other commissioners participating in tonight's town hall to take a minute or two to share any additional information that they might like to. And then I'll turn things over to the Early Childhood Funding Coalition to move us into the second portion of our meeting this evening so that we can hear and better answer your questions. So if there are any commissioners that would like to chime in and give a few brief remarks, cognizant of time, please unmute yourself and feel free to do so.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
Lillian, go ahead.
That's all right. Thank you. Thank you, George and Senator Manar. So everyone, we've now reached the Q&A portion of tonight's town hall. Please review the ways in which you can ask the commissioners questions. We ask that if you do raise your hand to speak, please keep your fellow town hall attendees in mind and limit your question to under 1 minute in length. And as a reminder, the way you can do that is to go ahead and click on your name and you will see a raised hand icon. So I will get us started with a couple questions from the chat box, and then I'll pass it over to Jess, who will take some live questions. The first one that I was sent in a private chat was, what is the recommended change you think will have a tangible impact in the lives of children and families or providers?
Could you repeat the question again? I didn't quite catch.
Sure. What is the recommended change, or perhaps one of the recommendations that is emerging you think will have a tangible impact in the lives of children, families, or providers?
Well, I think there's a number of them. I think if we are able to implement these recommendations as determined, one of them would be just even the ability to prioritize how state funds are used to make sure that we are reaching those with the greatest needs and barriers as we ramp up to a fully funded system. And so I think we could expect that many of those who might have had very limited access to services would be much better served than they are now. I think there's also providers should find it so far less of their time and energy and therefore dollars going into just simply navigating the system to be able to sustain funding and to be able to provide services and to be able to get clearer and more timely answers and support for the work that they're doing from the state. A third one, I think, is that communities should see a system that is really driven locally in terms of how planning is done around early childhood needs, rather than one that is really driven by competition for grant dollars to the state or federal government as really the determinant of how planning is done. Rather, I think we would seek to see that flipped so that communities are really the ones who are driving the bus, so to speak, around looking at the needs of children and families and how best services should be provided and how they should best be supported. So those would be just three off the top of my head. Maybe other commissioners would have other thoughts as well.
If I may, George, this is Will Davis. So my simple answer to your question, man, would be access and coordination. In my district out in the south suburbs, and a few of my providers on the call, they reach out to me when they have problems, and we try to address those problems. And we have met we try to meet on a fairly regular basis, if you will. But when I talk about access, making sure that everybody has access to services. What I hear too often is that we're often kind of fighting over the same clients. And then we often say that there are still so many clients out there yet to be served. So we find ourselves kind of in that situation. So just providing a great playing field of access so everyone can, access the services. And then coordination to help with that as well. Again, making sure that everybody understands what they're supposed to be doing, what lane they're supposed to be in, but still working collaboratively to make referrals. So when parents present themselves, if I can't service them based on the type of family dynamics, resources, if you will, making sure that they know where they can go, where they can be serviced appropriately. So that is how I would answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Jess, I think there are a couple people who have their hands raised. I'll pass it over to you for them.
Absolutely. Give me 1 second. So I'll start with Marcy. I know, Marcy, you had a question for the commissioners. You are now unmuted.
Thanks, and this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate the Commission's innovation to be able to do this work and really have the forethought to think long-term about our Illinois' youngest children. One of the biggest concerns we have is workforce right now, and the workforce that we have is traditionally underpaid. I really appreciated the intention of making sure that our workforce now is going to be fully compensated and to move us away from a minimum wage field to being more, maybe more replicated against the school systems. With that said, what are the strategies that the Commission has to make sure that these dollars are going to go into the hands of our greatest resource, our own staff? And that would be among all of the for-profit, nonprofit, the community base. But how do we really make this an actuality rather than just an aspiration? Go.
Yeah. Well, I'll start out and I'll again invite other commissioners to chime in. I think part of it is just looking at the fact that so many of the professionals in the field oftentimes are having difficulty with being able to both work full time and then to upgrade their skills to get a degree or qualification that would allow them to really even be eligible for a higher compensation. But we also need to be looking at our compensation scales, because even the best trained are often underpaid relative to other professionals with similar types of degrees. And we also have to look at the training, the way we go about providing professional development. And look and make sure that the professional development system is really responding to folks where they are and what they're in terms of what their lives are like, rather than just expecting everyone to go through so many hurdles to be able to even just get the skills that they need to be able to provide for their families, as well as to provide for the children that they're serving. That's just a real immediate thought. But what other commissioners, what other thoughts would other commissioners might offer on this topic?
I can jump in. I will share, Marcy, that was a fully loaded question, but I think the goal and the mindset is that we are so underfunded right now that it is almost an impossible task to pay living wages to staff. And certainly it's an honorable profession. People need to be paid a living wage regardless really of where they start. And then it should be going up incrementally to be on par with other professions. And so there is that recognition, but first we know that we have to aim for stability. And so I think that is sort of the mindset. How do we make sure that everyone in the field has what they need to provide quality to children and families? And then how do we expand those services? So that was sort of our charge when we looked at it. I think, the devil will be in the details with implementation on what that would look like. But certainly there's an acknowledgement that we have a lot to do around workforce in terms of even rebuilding it, particularly during this very, very difficult year.
And can I respond as well to Marcy? If we could go back to slide 7, if that's possible. And Marcy, I want to attempt to answer your question from a legislator's perspective. And I mentioned this in my remarks, but I think this visual here is so very important because for the first time, if these recommendations go through and the governor is going to review everything, it's going to set policy into motion in the General Assembly. For the first time, we're going to have a true picture of what the cost is. And that will be, I think, a very critical moment for policymakers in Springfield, in state government, because instead of just cobbling together this or taping together that, and calling it a win for early childhood care and funding, we will have a clear picture of where we are and how far we have to go. And critical to that, as you can see on this, is things centered around having appropriately paid staff, the proper number for staff of staff, and those things. I would just tell you, and I mean, don't anybody hang up on me or kick me off of this thing, but we don't even have those discussions today, especially to the extent that we should when policy and budget decisions are made. So I wanted to reiterate that when we get that number of what is going to be adequate, questions like the one that you asked, which are critical, we are going to be so much better suited to answer those questions once we have the full picture ahead of us.
Hi, this is Grace. I just wanted to add a couple of things really quickly, and I want to echo what our co-chairs have said regarding what we hope to do in the future. But I think it's also important to add that all of these changes don't have to be contingent upon the future, but in fact, I think our administration has taken great strides over the past couple of years to in fact increase rates, albeit probably not completely sufficient, as we all recognize, and have done, I think, a pretty significant amount of investments, especially during the past several months under COVID-19, and really doing our best to try to keep the system as stable as possible in very unstable times. And I think one of the things that Senator Menard mentioned, which I think is really important, is to begin looking at the cost of things as opposed to rate increases that don't necessarily recognize, right, what in fact the cost of providing quality care in an equitable way and what that looks like. So I think that is a priority that we, grapple with every day right now, even as, we are in this COVID-19 pandemic environment.
Thank you. We'll take another live question from Jeff, and then I'll go back to the chat box for a couple other questions.
Great. Rachel, you've got your hand raised. You are now unmuted. Please ask your question.
Hi, thank you. At the full commission meeting on Tuesday of this week, there was a discussion between two of the commissioners about taking a pause on the EI work, or that the EI work through the commission is unfinished at this time. I was wondering if you could elaborate on, one, what work the commission feels has not been finished, and two, what the specific plan is to make progress in that area.
I think as we looked at early intervention and as a system, and we realized that one of the complications of really making changes that we need to make to really create a unified system is we need to understand, the current reality of where those services are embedded and how they're being supported, and what makes them similar and different than other early care and education services. I think that we felt that we didn't have sufficient time in this time up until now to completely really dig into that before we made any bold pronouncements about how early intervention might be best positioned. One of the things about early intervention is that it has some aspects of it that are really, because of it being really focused more on the younger population, that are more similar to family support than they might be to looking at a center-based model in a pure sense. So we need to understand all of those complexities and where they might best be, supported. But I think the ultimate goal is that all of the components of the system would end up in a centralized agency. But how quickly we can get there is the question. And then what's the path to get there? We want to make sure we don't start out by, making changes or recommending changes that are not completely understood. So I think that is probably the broad, a question or maybe thought about why the work is considered unfinished. But again, I'll invite other commissioners to chime in on this this question too.
Thank you, George.
I'll add that this is Christina Chukian, that I don't remember the specific conversation that you're referring to from the last commission meeting, but one piece of this is more work we want to do on costing. There's I can't remember if it's before or after this slide, but sort of articulates work that's been done on the cost model side and work that is to be done. And the work to be done is really about collecting data. It's important that we have good data about what's going on in the world today so that we can begin to form a picture of what the future might look like from a cost perspective in order to model it. So I know that's one piece of it, and I think some of that data is being collected. I know that the work on EA is broader than that though.
This is Pat Chamberlain. I would add, thank you, Christina, and add to also more vetting and thinking about the funding mechanism pieces and digging into what are the benefits and burdens of those different funding mechanisms, and being able to think about building out some of the pieces of the system that aren't well supported, like collaborative time right now, and that which goes to both the cost modeling as well as sort of the mechanism piece. And being able to make sure that these are layered upon, basic ECEC funding so that all kids are in the same system, right? And managed in a unified system.
I think this is one of the areas, isn't it, that where the question of vouchers, versus contracts often comes up the most frequent, in terms of the pros and cons. So those are some of the things that we really need to get a lot more clarity about. I think a number of providers have commented on those issues.
Thank you very much. I see that we're getting a couple questions in the chat, as well as some comments on the YouTube about the Accelerate program. To what extent, I guess, do the recommendations influence the Accelerate program, and will it be restructured?
I don't know that we really have gotten specifically into that. Maybe some of the other commissioners on some of their work groups could comment more, but I don't know that we've gone into that specific discussion yet. But recognizing that the Accelerate program has at least set the table, I think we recognize that there's probably going to need to be some ways of improving how the Accelerate program can really reach more providers in a way that's really feasible for them to implement. I assume that that's going to be one of the realities. I think the idea of having a program that really sets those high standards for programs is really one we definitely want to retain. But it's something that's been a challenge for many providers to be able to really fully implement, and it's a resource challenge to a great extent. But I don't know if any of the work groups specifically at this point have gotten into it. It may fall more into the realm of the implementation side of things, but do other commissioners have any comments on Accelerate?
This is Rochelle Galladay, Cuddle Care. I wouldn't see any way, I see a lot of questions about DCFS licensing standards changes. Is INCRA involved? I don't see in the implementation stage any other way for such different programs would have to change. If requirements are changed for staffing and the implementation, if more money is provided to providers, of course, Great Start would have to change. We haven't gotten into those details, but I'm sure that would be a part of the implementation, but there's no way that those things wouldn't have to have some form of change with the quality that we're requiring from staffing. So, and the money that's going to be put out for staffing. I mean, INCRA is capped for Great Start at $18 an hour. If wages go up, I would assume that the Great Start requirements would change. So there's no way that those in the implementation phase, that those things wouldn't have to change as well. But that's in the details. We're just planning now.
Right. Excellent point, Rochelle.
Yeah, and I would just jump in and say, when during the cost modeling process, they really did look at ratios, and they looked at additional staff support, and they looked at, what is best practice around break time and around planning time, and so all of that was to some degree taken into consideration. So the idea is that programs would be funded at a level where they would be able to provide best practice services to children and families. That is the mindset going forward. But again, those details would have to be ironed out in implementation.
Right. Ultimately, how all of that would affect specifically the Accelerate program is yet to be determined in terms of the way it's structured. But as has been stated, we can't imagine that there wouldn't have to be some revisions in the approach, or that wouldn't be impacts, on how the program is being implemented. Right?
Thank you. And I'll pause for a second to check in with Vidi, who is in our Spanish speaking room. Did you have any questions that we could answer for the commissioners?
No, Lillian, there are no questions from that were left in Spanish in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much. I received a question about what happens after the recommendations are submitted. How do parents and providers have a voice in what happens next?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the things we're looking at in the commissioner's recommendations going forward is a need to change the infrastructure. Representative Davis had commented earlier about the idea of local coordination. Well, that local coordination system, it not only involves agencies, but it also involves creating a way that parents are intimately involved in the decisions about how services are provided, where they're provided, and what choices and options are available. And I really foresee that there would be some very strong recommendations for how do we build a local infrastructure and system that really very, very directly engages the voices of parents and how the system is being developed and how it's being supported at the local level. So I think it is really looked to as really being one of the essential requirements of a transformative approach to how we do things. I'll just ask again if other commissioners might have any comments on it.
I would mention too, there will be recommendations that, provided the governor agrees with us, there will be recommendations that agencies can implement. There will be recommendations that require support from the state budget. There will undoubtedly be recommendations that require legislation. And one thing that I'm proud of with the commission is the level of public input that has been part of our meetings thus far, that all commissioners pay very close attention to. And I don't see that changing. I would also mention, while we haven't landed perfectly on a set of recommendations at this point, because public input is valuable, this is going to take some advocacy too. So this isn't going to be just about, sifting through a detailed report that a lot of work went into. This is going to take some advocacy when it comes to implementing, I would say, some of the best recommendations that are going to dramatically change the status quo. Maybe not overnight, but over time. So public input is important, and it will be very important through advocating and also, perhaps trying to steer things in a more detailed direction once the report comes.
Thank you. I think we have time for a few more questions. Right now, it doesn't seem like we have anybody signed up for public comment. So I'll just mention again that if you would like to make public comment, please just say as much in the chat box, and Bethany will record your name. I'll go to one more chat question and then just pass it back to you. To what extent will the budget crisis affect any of these recommendations?
I'll let Senator Menard take that one.
Yeah. Well, we can't. I saw that just now in the chat from Cassie. So Cassie, we obviously can't ignore the budget challenges that we face today in the state for a whole host of reasons that have culminated. It seems like in the past few weeks and months, the economic downturn related to COVID, obviously the fair tax not being approved by voters. We have our work cut out for us. There is no doubt about that. But I liken that to what Representative Davis and I struggled with for years, and many folks on this call for years, to reform the K-12 system. There's always a reason not to do this, right? There's always going to be a reason not to plow ahead with substantive change. So even absent of being able to shower, billions of dollars into the early childhood system in the state, which we know is not going to be possible, just crafting the path forward, setting an adequacy goal, trying to better understand what gaps in the system exist today, and then devoting whatever resources we have available to fill those gaps, knowing that they will have a sizable impact. That's worth it. That's worth it. So are we going to be able to, plunk down the money that we need to plunk down in the system to make it the way we want it? The answer is no. And that's not being a defeatist, but that's recognizing the reality. But beyond that, having a map charted out for us, understanding the cost of the system, knowing where the gaps are, how to streamline things so that providers have a less difficult time accessing funds. Those things are invaluable to creating a system that we want in the state, and that is, that's as large of a part of what we have sifted through, and I think what you will see in the final recommendations as the number of what the cost is.
Right. I would just echo what Senator Menard said, and also add that really there are many things in these recommendations that can and should move forward within our current state systems, even in the absence of the billions of additional dollars that we really still would want and need, that can really start to improve the outcomes for children and families and providers. And those, I think, will be the focus of any implementation plan, even in the absence of really all the money that we really would like to have, because there's still a lot that we can do. Not to say that that's any real, shouldn't get us off the hook on the fact that we need these new investments. And the advocacy that was referred to before, may also be a big factor in that, as well as just the state's, funding reality, the state's, financial reality. So, but it's work worth doing, and I think we all wanted to, as commissioners, felt that it was more than worth while for us to be involved in moving these recommendations forward, and then advocating for them to be implemented as quickly and as thoroughly as we possibly can.
Thank you. One last question from the chat and then over to you, Jess. You mentioned centralizing into one agency. Will that be an existing agency, or what about a new agency?
I think the simple answer to that is that's one question that is really yet to be determined. The commission is recommending a single agency approach, but the determination of whether that's a brand new agency or an existing agency will really fall to the governor and to the judgment of him and his staff, and with the input that he has from us and others around what is the best path. And so at this point, the commission itself won't be the determiners of whether that's a new or existing agency, so to speak. The sense of the commission is that it should be a single agency regardless.
Thank you. Over to you, Jess, for some live questions.
All right, it looks like we've got two folks with their hands raised. First question is from FM Khan. I don't have your name, but I am going to unmute you. Please ask your question now.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. My name is Fazia Khan. I even typed my question. I want to know if there are any policies, any implementations that are going to come up in childcare programs, because in regards to the social distancing, the main core of our program is love and touch and affection and hugs going close by. We see so much of this when it comes to public school teachers and everything, and a valid concern about social distancing and everything. Are there any guidelines further going to be implemented or guidance issued in terms of social distancing, how we are going to be practicing continuing with social distancing in a group care childcare program? My other thing was direct compensation to the childcare staff. I know there are grants and things that have been going on, but staff that had worked through pandemic, essential workers, they've been taking care of that. Are there any plans, any thing in your books there to discuss about direct compensation to the childcare staff? Thank you so much for taking my question. Thank you.
I think this is an example of really some current realities that really kind of go beyond the charge of the commission as a body. We recognize that a lot of the things that we're talking about are really system and policy level decisions that, really are not designed to really address the immediate crisis that we're in. However, a lot of the things that you're raising, these are things that I think current state agencies, can and should be able to help answer. And so I think that's an example, I think, of a kind of question, rather than to try to give an answer or discussion tonight on. What we'd like to do is to have that question really be fielded by the state staff who are on the call, and then to really provide, if there is an answer that can be shared with all of the providers at the same time, because it is more of an immediate concern. We know that at some point we will be past the COVID, situation, and we'll still have to really fix a lot of things in our system. What COVID has done is it's exacerbated the disparities and equities that are already there. Childcare has been tremendously impacted by COVID, as well as other parts of the system. But the immediate answers to your questions probably can best be provided by the current system, the staff, who are supporting the childcare providers.
Thank you. We've got one question from
so much.
Jennifer, you're now unmuted.
Hi, thank you so much. So my question is this: I'm a director at a private daycare, and we are not in a very impoverished area. Well, prior to COVID-19, we're not in a very impoverished area. And when it comes to funding, we're private, and there's only one of us anywhere. So when it comes to funding, we don't fall into the category of having more than 50% of our kids be CCAP. We do accept CCAP, and we do not charge anything but what the CCAP parents have as a copay. So we're very careful to do that, but we're only at 20% CCAP. Also, we have some second language speakers, but not, we don't meet the guidelines of so many grants and so many funding areas that are out there for us right now. will that be addressed? Because we definitely need help, just like everyone else, and our kids would benefit from a lot of the things that you're talking about, especially special education, as we are an inclusive center, and we do work extremely closely with the preschools that work in the area, the elementary and early education that's attached to the elementary schools in our area. We work very closely with them. We have kids that they take on half day. It would mean so much to us to be included in that. And I feel like we just get left out so many times. So I'm wondering if something will be done about that.
Yeah, I think the hope is that, you know, the changes that we're seeking would really benefit all providers and all families. So in terms of being able to serve the needs of families and children better, you know, that's the general concept there. How that operates in a particular community, and you know, you mentioned the partnerships that you're involved in. I think that's one of the most challenging but important parts of our current system. On the one hand, we say to providers of all kinds, collaborate and partner and braid resources, but on the other hand, we make it very difficult for that partnering, braiding to really occur based on policy, regulation, and funding. And so it makes it, you know, we say one thing with our policy, but we say something else different with our regulation and with our resources. So one of the hopes is that we would really see a system that's streamlined in a way from the state level down to the local level, that these kind of collaborations and partnerships, just to make sure that all children get served, are really so much easier to accomplish and maintain. That is the goal, that's the vision. Again, getting there is going to be a number of steps. How quickly, I don't know. But I do think that, as Senator Menard pointed out, having a roadmap that says this is where we're going is going to get us there much quicker than if we don't. But yes, I'm hoping that would be the case. Again, does any other commissioner have any other comments on this question?
Jennifer, can I ask you, do you provide service in a rural area? Because that's the type of thing I hear a lot from rural providers.
We're in Naperville, so it's not
Okay.
incredibly rural. It's very suburban. But when we're surrounded by areas like, you know, Aurora and things like that, it feels like every time we try and jump into a grant situation, especially when it comes to our special needs kids, because we would love to be able to provide a one-on-one aid for these kids that desperately need it, even to be successful in just a half-day daycare program. And it's just an expense that we can't afford. We can't train our teachers to be special education teachers. You know, it just feels like we can't do what we need to do for them, but we want to do so much more.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think small providers in general have a lot of these types of challenges in wherever you are located. Any other comments by commissioners on that question at this point?
I think we have time for one more live question and one more question from the chat. Jess, do you have someone with their hand raised?
Yes. Pam, you are now unmuted.
Hi, I'm Pam Franks, and I'm a child care provider in Springfield, Illinois. I'm a family child care provider. And to piggyback off of what you said about the streamline of funding, I sit on the bargaining for the state with the SEIU union. And, you know, one of the things we know that we have a deficit. And we know, as you said, that the fair taxes didn't pass. And we also know with the pandemic and the unemployment and things like that makes our deficit more. But we also know, like in different parts of the area, we have streamlining. Like in Chicago, we have the collaboration with Head Start and family child care or early programs. We have even the partnerships. But it seems like in certain parts of the state, even like in Peoria, they had Skip Along, which is a contracted they do contracts with family child care. And it just seems like we all know quality costs. That's the reason for this whole focus group. Uh, but it just seemed like, how can we get that streamline of funding more south, more, because even though I'm in the capital, we still don't have any kind of partnership collaborations or any other streamlines which would kind of, it wouldn't just meet the needs, but it would help with the needs to be able to provide quality to low income families as we serve from the CCAP program.
Yeah, there's a lot of weaknesses in a system that is primarily competition and grant funded driven around really the equitable distribution of resources and capacity to provide services in all parts of the state. And that is it really, we feel that this approach of really centralizing, better coordinating and really simplifying the approach to how providers provide services based on local needs is the direction that we need to go in. But it is recognizing that this is a part of the reason that you're explaining why this is so important. Any other comments by commissioners about this question?
I'll just jump in to say, I think the commission recognizes the importance of racial equity, geographical equity, et cetera. And I think the recommendations come from that place. And we recognize that if we figure out how to support providers with financial stability and also meeting actual individual's child's needs, that you'll be able to deliver appropriate services. So I think to the other individual, I think it was Jennifer who talked about having special needs children and not really being able to provide the supports necessary to meet their needs the way they would like to. Our hope is that by adequately funding the system and centralizing everything, that you won't have to go through hoops as providers to get to funding. And more importantly, you'll be funded at a level that will allow you to meet the needs of the individual children, in your care. And that will be based on working through community collaborations about what do your individual communities need and working together rather than having that spirit of competition that we currently have now based on the way we deliver funding in the state.
Thank you very much. I'll just try to squeeze in one last question as people can see some upcoming opportunities to engage here on the slide. Would a new agency or a centralized agency work towards building better relationships with providers?
We certainly hope so. If we don't do that, then we haven't accomplished very much. But hopefully, providers would find it so much easier to work with the state and to collaborate with the state on how services are provided and get answers to questions and needs, that I would think that it couldn't help but improve the relationship. As someone who was involved for many years in providing local services and working with state and federal agencies, I can tell you the more different folks you have to deal with in different offices that have different sets of rules, policies, and approaches and answers to questions around the same topics, the harder it is for you to do your job and to really make sure that services are provided. So the hope for a centralized system with streamlined funding is that we would start to remove some of those barriers to providers and therefore to families and children. Do others have any comments or more to say on that question?
Thank you so very much. And thank you everyone for sticking around for just a couple extra minutes. You can see that, of course, this was the first of 4 town halls. So Registration will be made available soon for the ones coming up in January. Please note that the one on the 14th will be in the morning at 8:45. And there is a link in the chat box if you would like to join the activities of the Early Childhood Funding Coalition. We meet every month, and our first of 2021 will be on the 7th at 9 a.m. We hope to see you there. Thank you so much again